name is Jillian Morris. I'm an alum of SPC. I joined in 2017 when I was building my company Hitlist, which grew to 2 million users and then died in the pandemic. So it's someday maybe I'll have more stories to tell. But I am also a die-hard Foursquare user to this day, Swarm. I'm curious to actually see anyone else raise of hands, still a Foursquare user.
Hey.
Great, you're in good company. And so incredibly excited to talk to Dennis today. I already put this in the SPC Slack, but I do feel like some of us, more senior people had to impart to the younger folks quite how big and how important Foursquare was back in the day. And I mean, obviously Foursquare is still a huge business, but in terms of its share of the consumer conscience, at a lot of times people thought maybe it was going to eclipse Facebook. There was just so much excitement back in the day. So we want to talk about that. And also all of Dennis's other projects, his first company, Dodgeball, and everything through to new projects, his football club, soccer club, sorry, spent too much time in Europe, and maybe something called bbot.
Sure, yeah.
So anyway, without further ado, if you have anything else you want to say to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dennis. I've been in New York like 25 years. I worked in this building for maybe 3 years. I live in Greenwich Village. I got 3 kids, and I'm on like my 5th startup now.
Great.
So.
Yeah. So we at SPC, we concentrate a lot on this, -1 to 0.
Yeah.
So Dodgeball, your first company was it was an undergrad or master's thesis project. So it was something that just kind of came about organically?
I went to, feel free to jump in any time, is that right? So I went to grad school at, NYU has this weird program called ITP, which is a little bit of like art and technology school. Jeff is in the back, graduate also, hey, what's up? And for the senior thesis, we were kind of doing this exploration of like what happens when you take social networks, and like Friendster was all the rage, and you combine it with mobile phones, and you could just start to text message across carriers, which was a big deal, and combine it with maps. And Google Maps had just come out. And so, I was hugely inspired by the Harry Potter books, specifically the Marauders map in Harry Potter. And I was like, well, what if you could make a Marauders map like for New York City? How would you do that? But like the only thing that we had was like crappy flip phones with text messaging. So that's what we did. And you would just text in and say, hey, I'm at a bar called The Magician. Hey, I'm at the NYU library. Hey, I'm at Central Park. And it would broadcast back out to everyone else. And that was like our first thing. It was like a startup before it was really a startup. It was our thesis project at NYU. And then, there's like a long story in the middle, but we ended up selling it to Google back in like 2005, right out of NYU. And we try to make a lot of that stuff happen while we were at Google for a couple of years.
Okay, but that long story that you just jumped past, that's
Yes.
what I really want to jump into. Okay,
Yes.
So you start this, it's a senior thesis project, it starts to get traction organically. How did you get your first users?
Well, remember, this is like 2004 into 2005. And I know it's like a long stretch, but there wasn't a lot going on, right? I was like eating at the pizza place over near NYU, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I was working out of the NYU computer lab because it was free, and they were nice to let me stay there during the summer, and just like grinding away on features, right? This was the time when blogs were new, and like normal people doing stuff on the internet was new, and so anything kind of novel, the mainstream media wanted to write about it. So right around the time that we were graduating and we were looking for other jobs, like Newsweek wrote a story about us, and then the New York Times wrote a story about us, and then like Business Week wrote a story about us, mostly because like there wasn't a lot of stuff to write about. But then my co-founder and I, this guy Alex, like we had this epiphany. It's like, maybe we shouldn't be trying to get jobs. Like maybe this should be our job. Like, how do you turn your thesis into a job, right? Like, who's gonna pay you? What's your health insurance? And so we just kind of made a commitment to each other, like, let's work on this thing through the summer. We'll take a bunch of like crappy freelance jobs just to pay our rent and just kind of grind through it. And it turns out that because we were part of NYU, we would get these like speaking gigs places, and like, hey, go represent NYU as like someone that's doing cool stuff. So I remember being out at a conference in California and presenting to a big room of people, standing up on top of a podium with slides behind me, which I hadn't done a lot at that time. But it turned out that someone from Google was in the room listening to the story about Dodgeball and our idea of like mobile social software. And they were like, this is really fascinating. Will you come to Google and give a talk about it? And I was like, sure, like, that sounds great. Free lunch. And so like we went there, we gave the talk, and then someone that was in the audience was like, hey, can you give a talk to my group? Can you give a talk to my? So we did the same talk like 5 times in a day, and it just kicked off. I mean, it was totally lucky, totally serendipitous, which I think a lot of like success that you end up having ends up being, right place, right time, just because you showed up in all of the rooms that you were supposed to be in, and eventually something works out. But yeah, that's just kind of how it came together.
And so you didn't raise any funding?
Well, we tried. Like no one wanted to touch two kids that were kind of from this weirdo art school at NYU building stuff for flip phones. It just wasn't a thing. Like NYU was over here, and across the street from the Starbucks up the street, there used to be a Barnes and Noble. And so I would go to the Barnes and as a bookstore. You go there, there's books inside the store. And I would go to the business section up on like the second or third floor, and I would like read or flip through like, how do you write a business plan? What is it supposed to look like? What am I supposed to talk to investors about? And I'd run back to NYU and I'd put these pitches together. And we probably pitched like 2 or 3 investors, and we just didn't know what we were doing. Like I remember like Union Square Ventures was a thing at the time. And I remember like, gosh, can you imagine if we were ever able to get in front of Union Square Ventures? And it just wasn't possible. Like we weren't there. It just wasn't our thing. Which is interesting, if you fast forward a couple years in the future. But we didn't know what we were doing, and we were just kind of making it up as we went. And we just kind of got really lucky being in the right place at the right time, meeting some folks from Google, and it wasn't like some crazy like rocket ship acquisition number. Like we're a 2-person team, but we went and worked at Google, and we worked at Google New York back when it used to be up in Times Square. And we were part of the early group of Google folks that were trying to figure out and articulate and understand like what does the future of the internet look like on mobile phones, like for everyone, right? There just wasn't a lot of people doing that at that time, and it was a really cool place to be.
I mean, amazing time to be at Google for sure.
Yeah.
So, but just again, the exact mechanics of it. So Google, someone approaches you saying, we want to buy you.
Saying, why don't you come work here? Okay, do you want to invest? No, we don't invest. You want to get acquired? Yes, sure. How do we do it? And we were like super broke. And it wasn't like a 10-day thing. It took months and months and months, mostly because we were so small that I don't think anyone really, like, there was no champion for it. Like we were constantly reminding them and begging them. Like you ever apply for a job and you really, really want the job, but they probably don't want you and they don't really care about you, or they're not like super passionate about bringing you in. It was kind of one of those situations. It's like, remember how excited you were like 6 months ago? Like, can't we just come and work here? Like, can we make this happen? It took a long time, and it was fine once we got there. It was good. And we stayed at Google for about 2 years, but then we had kind of a weird exit just because like it turned out that like about a year into it, we figured out that, and this is like 20 years ago, right? It's like, yeah, like 20 years ago. And we kind of figured out that they wanted us to work on other stuff at Google when really we just wanted to work on this one thing. We wanted to specifically work on Dodgeball, mobile, social software, dots on maps, helping people find their friends, Harry Potter, Marauder's Map. That was our thing. And they're like, yeah, but can't you go work on this thing, like the address book for Gmail? I'm like, no, that's not our wheelhouse. And so like it took us like a year to get in there. We did good work for like a year, and then it took us like a year to get out. And when we got out, we were kind of frustrated about it because it was like, I felt like that was like my life's work at the time. I was like 27 or whatever. But even though it was an NYU project, like I had worked on it before NYU. Like I had a job back in like 2001. I worked my first .com job. Where everyone got laid off because the company went out of business. And then once I got laid off, like all my other friends got laid off from all their jobs. And that was like the very, very beginning of Dodgeball. So it was like a project that we worked on for, a couple years, and then just like as a side project. And then went to NYU and kind of dusted it off after a year at NYU. And then it turned into something, and then it turned into our thesis. And, so it was like like the only email I ever had was like Den's at Dodgeball. And so when all that stuff went away, the day that we left Google, it was like shattering. I was like, I guess, what do we start from scratch? Like, what do we do now? Like, who hires the person that like sold their thing to Google, but couldn't make it work within Google. And like, it was a really tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
And I was in a tough spot for like a year, where I was just kind of floating around, like doing some freelance gigs, and just I joined a buddy's company, and I was trying to fit in there and make that work, and I just couldn't like get back on my feet. And I remember it was by the way, you can cut me off anytime. Okay, but it was probably about a year afterwards, and we're at my buddy's birthday party at a bar like around the street, probably 100 yards from here, and Google had put out a press release. And I mean, it's got to be like a Friday night, birthday party for this guy. And the press release is like, Google's going to turn off these 3 services. Remember, we had left like a year before, and they were turning off Google Notebook and a project called, I don't know what the other one's called. And one of them was Dodgeball. And I was like, they're going to turn it off. Like, we're still using it. Like, even though we left, like the servers were still on. We had friends that were still maintaining stuff like on the sly. And I remember like, if they're going to turn it off, like we're just going to make another one, right? It's like, we can do that, right? But by this time the iPhone was out. And so it was like the iPhone was much better than a flip phone, and apps were much better than text messaging. And then GPS was built into it. And, so me and my buddy Naveen, like we were working together, kind of sharing it. We were working at a co-working space, not too far from here. At the time, like we decided that we would work together and launch this thing called Foursquare, like as a sequel to Dodgeball.
Okay, so you said we for a long time. So that was you and Alex at first for Dodgeball.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how did you and Alex meet?
Okay.
And were you guys in lockstep through the whole time about, what strategy, co-founders are one of the most important things to making any company work. So I'm curious how that relationship developed.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Alex and I, we met on day 1 of ITP. And I remember going to ITP and being like, do I belong in art school? Am I supposed to be in business school? Like, I don't really know. And I met this guy, Alex, who had worked at a company called Razorfish, which is like an interactive design firm. And he was going through the same thing. And I was like, okay, we're instantly going to be pals. And from day 1 of school, from ITP, we worked on all of our projects together. And so, it was our and ITP is a 2-year program, very cool program, by the way, you should check it out. And it was on the second, the summer between our first and second years. It's like, well, let's do another project together. And I think Alex said, like, why don't you dust off that Dodgeball thing that you had? Like, we'll see if we can get that working again. And I was like, okay, that seems like a good idea. But like, Dodgeball wasn't really a company. Like, it was, right? But like, it wasn't. It was just the 2 of us. There was no one to manage. There was no office space, no bills, no paycheck. It was just the 2 of us doing this thing. And so like the co-founder dynamics were just kind of like, it's like you're working with your buddy. Like Foursquare got much more complicated because it got much bigger, much quicker, primarily because we had access to capital. By the way, worth noting, like I came. This is the old Foursquare space. I came in, took a bunch of pictures. Like the first person I text them to is Alex, right? So I'm like, dude, guess where I am? Like, I'm gonna see this picture. Tell me where I am. I'll check my phone after this talk. And so yeah, like we're still like good pals through all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So, but Alex did not join the journey of starting Foursquare, or did?
No, when we left Google, we both kind of went separate ways. And it was less of like I don't want to work with you anymore. It's just kind of like, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do? I don't know. And so he went to, I don't even remember where he went. And then, I went and worked at a buddy's game design studio for a little bit. And worth noting that like Alex, we hired him back as like employee number 10 or 12 at Foursquare to maybe it was less than that, to run product probably in 2010 or something. So.
Okay, cool. So you met Naveen at this co-working space?
Yes.
General Assembly?
No, it wasn't it was like a shared office space.
Okay.
It was up on 12th Street, actually like a block from where I live now, which is always so weird. And that New York does that to you. Yeah. It's like, I now work next to the place that I now live, the 2 blocks from where I used to work forever. But yeah, so Naveen was just like, we were 2 people, we had overlapping friends. Like I was good at PHP, incredibly valuable and sophisticated programming language. And Naveen was like the one person I knew that knew how to write iPhone code. And it's like, how about we work together? And we just started working out of my kitchen table. He was at that party that night, the birthday party where they announced that they were going to turn Dodgeball off. And that was it was this moment where, we were kind of like messing around with some stuff. Like I had this idea for there should be another version of Dodgeball, and we could use game mechanics to like make things really interesting. I was really into this idea of like turning life into a game, and we were like, just kind of playing with that stuff a little bit. The game design studio I was working at was like kind of exploring those themes, like City as a game board. And so, Naveen and I, we decided we would do this together, but it was once Google put out that press release and said they're going to turn the services off, I was like, all right, well, we got to get this done. When they turning it off, who knows? 90 days? When's 90 days? March. What's going on in March? There's this thing called South by Southwest. It's a big conference. Okay, well, let's have it done by that, and we'll bring it to South by Southwest because all of our friends will be there, and that's a good time to show them what we're working on. Mm-hmm. And that, that South by Southwest wasn't a place that you went to launch products until we were the ones that are like, well, everyone's already here. Like, we might as well just launch our thing here.
It's funny because this was one of my questions, because that became such an iconic thing to launch your product at South by. But Twitter Twitter hadn't launched, but it had sort of taken off at South by in 2007, right? So then you were South by 2009.
Yes.
And was there any? Did you have any connection to the org, or was there any, like, how did you do that launch strategy? Sorry, it's South by, the sort of official
you're giving
conference.
us like way too much credit.
Cool.
Okay, let's go back to 2006. So 2006, we're at Google, and Google's like, we will pay for you to go to South by Southwest. And I was like, wait, you're gonna pay? This is awesome. So we go down there, and remember, like, Google has like 2 or 3 social things. It's Dodgeball, it's Blogger, and I don't know, maybe Google Reader was the other thing. Who knows what it was? Our joke was, like, when we were in New York and we would go out to San Francisco, we would sit at like the failed acquisition lunch table, right? And so we sat with the Blogger guys, and like we knew that whole crew. That was just like, oh, you got acquired, I got acquired. What are you working on? Yeah, okay. So we that was our lunch table, and when they would come to New York, they would sit. That's where they would sit too. So we decided that we would throw like a joint party at South by Southwest. And at that point, like, you had Dodgeball was already sold, but it was working. It had tens of thousands of users, which is maybe a lot at that. Who knows? We're at South by Southwest. Everyone that uses Dodgeball is there, right? Dodgeball has a moment. And it's like, whoa, look at this. This is how it works. You check into the Mohawk bar, I think that's the name, Mohawk bar, whatever, and everyone shows up. And it was like, holy cow, like, this thing's really gonna work. Like, we had our belief, because that was the first time we really saw it working at scale. We show the Blogger guy, right? We show the whole Blogger crew how it works, all this stuff. And then, that was March of 2006. And then Twitter comes out July of 2006. So it's like, oh, I'm sure they were kind of inspired by what we were doing with text messaging and coordination, and then they have like the micro-blogging version over text messaging. And so we go back in 2007, and Twitter is like a thing. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. And then 2008, I don't remember what the thing was. I think it was still Twitter again. And then 2009, but no one was launching there. It was just like, that's the thing that people are using. I mean, because it wasn't 50 things launching. It was like, there was like one thing to talk about. Dodgeball was it 1 year, Twitter was it 2 years in a row, and then the next thing was Foursquare. But we didn't go down with there was no launch strategy, there was no marketing. It was like, we were still coding it up on the plane. You kind of get out of the airport and you hope it's still working. We left one of our founding engineers, this guy Harry, who I used to work with at Google. He stayed back in New York City, like, just making sure the servers stayed up overnight. And we just went down there and we just showed people the app. Like, you'd go to a party and like, oh, I know half the people here. Let me show you the app. You can just download it from the store, and then everyone's using it. And so that we come back from South by Southwest, which was super, super fun. And we have like 4,000 users. We went from like, 200 users in New York to 4,000, 5,000 users. And I was like, hey, maybe we can raise some money for this thing. Like, we just we're the breakout hit of South by, everyone's talking about us. But then that summer, because remember, South by Southwest is like March 2009, right? We didn't close around until Labor Day, right? September 2009. And in that summer, even though like we are the hottest thing you can talk about on TechCrunch or Mashable or whatever the thing is at the time, like I was pitching left and right, and we had like, I think I had 32, 33 people said no. And I was like, but we did, like, we're the breakout hit. Look at us, we're on Mashable every day. We're launching new stuff all the time. And, at that time it was just me, Naveen, and Harry kind of cranking through the summer, working on stuff. And no one wanted to touch it, right? Like Google already bought this thing and then they turned it off. And now you're building it again. Like, why would we ever invest in this? And then it took, you know what it was that made things happen? It was like we were pitching people. By this time, we were able to get in front of Union Square Ventures. And I remember like, oh my gosh.
There we go.
We're going to go, like, this is it. This is our thing. And I remember it was a good conversation, and they liked our deck. Fred, Albert, Charlie O'Donnell was there. Andrew Parker was one of the, I don't know, he's like a junior partner or whatever. But yeah, just talking to that crew. And I remember pitching it, and I might get the order wrong, but Charlie O'Donnell wrote a blog post. And the blog post was entitled, "I've seen the future of Yelp," and it's called Foursquare. And I remember reading the blog post, and it was about like the ecosystem that we had kind of accidentally created. Like, people check in at places, they become the mayor, the venue rewards them, the people push it to social media, the coffee shop gets famous on Twitter, makes more people want to check in there, and it was kind of this like ecosystem of people checking into places, earning rewards, merchants kind of playing along and kind of like, flirting with the people that were checking in and kind of playing along with that. And I mean, that was like oblivious to us. I was like, we're just making a fun thing to use with our friends. And it almost took Charlie like to re-articulate like, well, this is the business. Like, you're obviously going to do this stuff with merchants. I'm like, yeah, obviously, right? That's obviously what we're going to do. And it was, I get the order confused, but it was around the same time that I remember people used to post pictures to Flickr, right? Flickr's like Instagram, but on the web. And there was a picture of a flyer that was hanging up in San Francisco, and it said, if you check into this called the Marsh Cafe. If you check into the Marsh Cafe and show us, we'll give you $1 off or something. And so someone took a picture of that flyer, posted to a telephone pole, and sent it to me. And they're like, "Hey, are you cool with this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." And I remember calling up the Marsh Cafe, and I was like, "Hey, I run this company called Foursquare. I'm talking to the manager. Like, does anyone ever show their phone and say that they check in?" And they're like, "Yeah, it happens all the time." Like, and you give them $1 off. Like, yeah, we just give them a discount. And I'm like, if I made you something that special for people to show you, would that be better? And they're like, yeah, it'd be easier for us. I'm like, okay. So we code that thing up and we push it live probably that day, like a special blue screen. If you check in, you get a discount at the Marsh Cafe. Show the person, call them back and show them the screen. They're like, yeah, okay, great, this is great. And that was like the beginning of this merchant program that we had that eventually had, millions of merchants signed up for it.
I just love the way that you can ship things in a day when you're a small company.
Well, yeah, that's what you do, right? That's the point of being at a small company. You just you have an idea and you make it, and if it doesn't crash everything, so be it. And if it looks ugly, you fix it later.
Okay, so at this point, did Union Square Ventures finally give you a term sheet?
They were yes. Well, I had another buddy from O'Reilly Alpha Tech. This guy Bryce.
Roberts?
Yeah, Bryce Roberts. Yeah, and so Bryce was the one who loved dodgeball. We were just kind of friends. And he's like, I can't lead the round, but I want to be I'll definitely support it. Just find someone to lead it. And so we went and we found Andreesen Horowitz. And so it was, not Andreesen Horowitz, we found Union Square Ventures. And so it was Union Square Ventures and O'Reilly came in, and we raised like, I don't know, $1 million, 1.1 maybe, right? Which was like, holy cow, $1 million.
Woo.
We get a check from Union Square Ventures, right? I remember we closed the deal and we're like, oh, okay. We not like close it, but like, Albert, who joined the board, was like, okay, well, where do we wire the money? I'm like, I don't know. So I go up to the Chase, the chaser on the corner, and I was like, hey, I got to open a business account. And the guy's like, great, what's your business? And I'm like, oh, we're making stuff for phones. Sweet, you have to put a minimum deposit down. Like, great, I have $1 million check. And the guy's like, where did you get $1 million check? Like, it's super shifty.
Yeah.
And so I was like, can I just do that? Like, how about I'll give you $50 first to open it, and then I'll give you the $1 million check. And that's like, it was weird, right? And we deposit, we got I remember we all went to the ATM, and we printed out like 12 receipts, right? To say like, look at this, I sent them to my mom. And my mom and dad have like a table in the house, it's called the brag table. Like, if you do anything good, you get in the brag table, right?
Okay,
And
yeah.
so I had a run where I like dominated the table for like many years. But the
That's
the,
a
yeah,
tough
the
sibling to
receiver
have.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone's doing great, but I was crushing it for a bit. So, what next?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Union Square Ventures gives you this. This is your first round of funding.
First round of funding, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that it took you 33 no's to get to this because I mean, you were like,
Yeah.
this was the heyday. Facebook was starting to really take off. You'd think that there would be. Do you think that the fact that you were in New York City had anything to do with this?
Yeah, I mean, I was traveling trying to get checks, but like a lot of it was like you already did this, you already sold it. Google didn't want it. Google knows best. And I remember being like, there's something here. I know there's something here. And we knew there was something here. Like, I mean, the story I can tell you is like, I used to sit at my desk at Google and, you know, I mean, the thing was still running off like a MySQL database. And I'd type these queries in because we had, you know, thousands of people checking in every day. And, you know, it becomes a lot of data. And I would do these queries like, you know, show me all the places that my friends check into on Saturday mornings between like 11 and 1 that are, you know, not too far from my apartment, rank them by popularity, filter out the ones I've already been to. And it's like, okay, here's a list of places that you should go to for brunch that all your friends love that you haven't been to yet. I'm like, that's a killer app. That's like a personalized map of the world. And we had that at Google. And I was pitching that at Google, like, this is it. And we just couldn't get it done. And so I kind of make us seem dumb when we started Foursquare, but like, we're like, okay, we need check-ins. We're gonna make the personalized map of the world. How do you get check-ins? We'll do the game. We wanna do the game stuff, it's fun anyway, right? Well, what game? Okay, well, let's make a one-player game. We have to get all the badges. Okay, and because you play the game, you check in, we get the data, you get the badges. Okay, well, then we'll make a two-player game that you play against your friends, and that's the leaderboard. You know, like who had the best Saturday night, who had the best weekend. And then and if you don't have any friends, we have like a two-player game that you play against strangers, which is the mayor mechanic. Like we were very calculated here. Like there was something for everyone in that initial version. And it's like, we'll just take out what doesn't work. And it turns out like all of it worked. And it generated lots and lots of check-ins and data for us. So it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna get to make this personalized map of the world. Like we knew what we were doing because we had that core insight. But like it takes a lot of people to do that and build that thing up. And admittedly, you know, like the game mechanic stuff was so successful and so kind of addicting to people. Like I meet people all the time. They're like, I love Foursquare. I'm still the mayor, right? Like the mayor thing is like 17 years old. Like, you know, we dreamed it up at Think Coffee on Mercer Street in like an hour. And that's like a mechanic that has lived for like 15, 16, 17 years. And it's still magical. I became like the mayor of a ramen place. And I still had that rush of like, fucking yeah. You know? And like, it just worked. But it worked so well that like the company got distracted by that for a long period of time. We didn't want to be a game. We wanted to be this personalized map of the world. And, you know, but like you've got so many people using this thing that you got to keep the game working. You got to keep the servers running. You got to keep the cheaters out. You know, people were trying to game the system to get their free coffee, to get their $1 off. Like they were using the API to make these malicious tools that would like make them the mayor of every place in Chicago. And so while we are trying to do this amazing, you know, invent the future personalized map of the world, we're playing defense against the cheaters, right? Like we had this whole thing going on in Indonesia where like we had tons of people in Indonesia that were just trying to collect all the badges. There were no badges to get in Indonesia. They were all in the US. They wanted the badges. And so they were checking into every place in America. And it was like, what is going on? Like, why do we have to fix this? Because like, if you don't fix it, then the game is broken for everyone else and no one wants to play a broken game. So off topic, but yeah.
Yeah, no, okay.
You got to keep me.
There are like a million questions to ask here, but I love letting you run because we're getting interesting stuff. So you get your first round from O'Reilly Alpha Tech and Union Square Ventures.
Yeah.
And you're growing like crazy.
Yes.
And you, I assume, had a lot of people who wanted to invest. So at that point, how did you start to be more discerning about who you wanted to be your investors for the next round?
Okay, great question. Yeah, once once someone says yes, everyone says yes,
course,
right? And so that if you've ever gone through fundraising, you just kind of know how that works.
Sometimes I'm like, and you call yourselves venture capitalists,
Yeah,
but almost no one wants to get the first.
It's super frustrating.
Like, follow capitalists.
Our round was closed. We're raising $1 million. We got the 2 people. Everyone else missed out. Interesting Foursquare folklore is that after once Union Square said they were interested, we didn't just say yes. Like we did kind of do a bake-off, and we talked to a lot of people, and like a bunch of people lost the deal. And there was this idea of we lost the deal because we're not in New York. And I think Foursquare gets credit, and I like this story. Deserves credit. I'm not gonna, whatever, I will take a little victory lap for it. But a lot of people opened offices in New York in the period between our Series A and our Series B. Because our Series B was super, super hot. And we went through the process of selecting who we wanted to work with. We were wined and dined by all these people. It was super fun. I haven't even thought about this in years, but it's that was really fun period. And
I'm really tempted to ask what was the most lavish thing that someone tried to tempt you with?
The first time I ever sat courtside at a basketball game. It was, I remember going out to dinner with some investors, and I could tell that they were trying to get me and my now wife, Chelsea, she was my girlfriend at the time, and they took us out to dinner, and Chelsea and I realized in the middle, they're trying to get us drunk. So they can get some insight in the fundraising. They don't realize that we drink every night of the week. Let's just keep going. There's no way you investors from the Valley are gonna win. So let's just do this. That's
the secret edge of New York.
Founders, stuff like that. There was I'll skip the next one. Okay. But it was just it was wild. It was go days of venture, and we were right in the middle of it. Yeah. But we, Andreessen Horowitz was the name, the firm to work with. And listen, I went to college in 1994. The summer before I went to college, there was an article written in the Boston Globe about this guy, Mark Andreessen, that invented this web browser that only ran on supercomputers, and you could only get the supercomputers at college. And I remember reading that being I am counting down the days to get on the internet at school. I was just so jazzed for it. So back in call it 10, 15 years before Foursquare, I was a Mark Andreessen fanboy. And so when he calls me up and I get a call, it's yes, Mark Andreessen. I'm get out of here. But it is, and he's I was talking to the partners. I hear you guys are raising around. We're doing a fund. We'd love to be involved. And it's just all this weird stuff starts happening. We at South by Southwest 2010, Yahoo wanted to acquire the company. Facebook expressed interest in buying the company. We had a bunch of people that wanted to fund us for venture stuff. I was on the cover of Wired magazine. It was just it was
I sent a screenshot of that to the Slack.
Yeah,
it's a great. You've got a crown and a scepter.
It's also it's a great picture, but it's also before you do a photo shoot, you should have a PR person that comes in and is you know what, you don't put the crown on. Don't do that. That's even for one shot, because it was a one shot thing. Fine, I'll do it for 1 second, and then that's it. All right. PR people are very valuable.
You look
and
great
awesome.
in the photo. It's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I looked back at it and I laugh and cry inside. That I did it. I got on the cover wearing a crown. So be it. But yeah, those are super, super fun go-go days in which we were growing the company very quickly. By that time, we had moved up here because we had outgrown the space downstairs. We were outgrowing the space, and then I remember someone said, you know what it was? We were outgrowing the space downstairs, which we shared with 2 other companies. And one day the elevator just happened to be unlocked, and it went up to this floor. And we were looking for spaces around the area. We can't find anything. And just one day the elevator is magically unlocked. We had never been to the 6th floor, and it opens up, and it's this place is empty? And we went down and we talked to the landlord, and yeah, it's been empty for a while. Well, we'll just move up here. Okay, yeah, here's a sweetheart deal. No one's been here. And it's okay. So we did a little bit of renovation. We built all these glass conference rooms.
I was going to say kitchen. That you mostly make your own luck, but that just seems very lucky.
Sometimes you just get lucky. Yeah. Or in hindsight, I'm only telling you the parts where we got lucky. The parts where you feel you get totally hosed, they just don't make it into part of the story. When we were doing the tour earlier, we were talking about, as soon as I rolled in, I was pointing out, we made these conference rooms, and see this stairwell? Like, I cried in the stairwell like 50 times, not 50 times, a dozen times. You're like, not because something went bad, but you're just like, okay, team, like, we're doing great, right? Everyone's doing great. And you're like, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. I'm so over my head. I can't deal with the stress of this anymore. And you would go out in the hallway, and maybe someone from BD is making a call downstairs because our 3 conference rooms are booked, and you are like, sitting there just trying to like, yeah, maybe not wailing, but just like trying to keep it together.
Yeah.
You're just like, you're definitely like overcome with emotion, just like, this is my job and I have to go back in there and I got to make this work. And it's just part of it. It sounds like whoever said that, it sounds like the feeling. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel the journalists need to just go into what are some times that you did get unlucky? Let's talk a little bit about those. I mean, one thing that obviously springs to mind is Facebook rolling out this complete clone feature of check-ins. That's an example. Is there?
Well, I'd spent. Go ahead.
Well, I guess, is there anything that you feel like you could have done to defend against that? Is there anything you wish you'd done differently after that happened? Was that a big inflection point for you? It certainly seemed like it to me as a user, because people started checking in on Facebook where it used to be you checked in on Foursquare and then posted it to Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, I had spent a bunch of time with Mark like that spring. And he was here in New York, and I'd fly out there because they were interested in buying the company. And I was like, I sold the company before, and it was crappy, and I did not have a great experience. And then I left, and I had to start the same company again. And it was like, well, that's not going to happen here. And I was just trying to like get over this. Like, is that what I do? Is that what I mean? That's a big deal to at that time, especially because Facebook was so small. And so, Mark was like, if you guys don't end up here, like, we're probably just going to end up doing something like this. It's a feature, like, we'll build it into our app. And I remember, like, we knew that was coming. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't bad luck. They invited us to their launch announcement when they did it, which we went to. And I sent my, our BD guy, this professional guy named Holger, super pro. I was like, hey, go there. If they give you any podium time, just get up there and talk about how awesome Foursquare is. Like, just go totally off script, which he did, which was super fun. But I remember, like, we watched that keynote and we watched them announce it. It wasn't a keynote, just they gave a presentation at their office and live streamed it. And having to get up in front of the team, which might have been like, 50 people, 60 people at the time, and be like, and give a pep talk, like, just off the top of my head about, like, yeah. And the vibe of the talk was like, they can copy everything that we've done, but they can't copy what our roadmap is. And our roadmap was that, epiphany we had at Google. You make a personalized map of the world. We knew we wanted to do that. Like, I was working on kind of an engine that, you should never have to check in. A check-in button is stupid. The phone should just know where you are. And then based on where you are, the map gets smarter, right? Like, that's obviously how it's going to go. Like, that is what we're going to build. Like, will Facebook try to do that? They'll copy all the stuff that we'll do, but we will always be one step ahead. And I remember giving that, like, pep talk to people at Foursquare, and people at Foursquare at that time, like, they still remember that. I remember that, they remember that. The whole thing, like, you don't remember what people said, they remember how you made them feel, right? I've heard the stories that people in the room remembered how that made them feel, that we were still gonna win, and that we could still do this. And that was, yes, it took a hit, right? But at the same time, it kind of like legitimized the category. Check-ins are a thing, and we are a check-in company, and we are now maybe the second biggest check-in app on the planet now that Facebook is doing their thing. So all that stuff was kind of tough. But that was the summer, like, yeah, Facebook did it first, but then Google started doing it, and then what's the other one? Yelp. Yelp was like, we have check-ins, and you can be the Duchess of a place. And I was like, guys, that was like shameless. But then, like, if there's a silver lining in, like, the Foursquare consumer story, I think it's like all of these apps are better because we were all competing at the time. Like, if you go into Google and you see that thing, it's like, what are the popular hours? Like, that's a feature that's ripped off of Foursquare. Like, we did that. The automatic history, where are the places you've been? Like, we did that. Like, little mini reviews that aren't long Yelp things. Like, we invented, like, a lot of the stuff in the category here, and which makes its way through 1,000 other internet products.
Yeah.
Including like the fact that like everything's gamified, right? Whether that's good or bad. Like, were we the first? We're the very first, but I think we mainstreamed it for certain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's got to feel great that you were at that you were the impetus for these big tech companies adopting these features. Did you ever get close to selling to any of these companies?
Yeah, we entertained, like, we thought long and hard about the Facebook deal. The Yahoo one, a little bit, took it seriously. The Facebook one, it was like, yeah, we should really consider this. And then there was like multiple opportunities along the way. It wasn't the last time we talked to Facebook. We talked to Google a bunch of times. And just like it just wasn't the right fit at the time. Foursquare is like 16 years old now. And, a company has had like a long period of like ups and downs in terms of valuation, in terms of like perception in the market. A company does, north of $100 million in revenue, profitable companies, 400 people, a bunch of offices. Like, I don't work there anymore. I'm on the board. But like there was a period after, we'll call it like 2000, you get crazy acquisition offers until like 2013, 14, maybe less than that. And then as the business starts to like come together and you realize like, wow, this is gonna be a slog of a business to actually build, like those offers go away. And then you're just kind of like on your own building the company. Like one of the jokes was from way back in the day was like, Foursquare was worth more before we made $1, right? Because once you make your first $1, you realize how hard it is to make $1 and how hard it is to make the next $1 and how big the company has to be in order to continue making dollars, right? But like, in the early days, 9, 10, 11, you're just like, we're getting big. Everyone's writing it about us. People are loving it. You're new features every day. And it's like, it's hard to see where the ceiling on that stuff is. So it's just, I don't know, just part of the long journey.
I mean, the lesson of many of the largest tech companies we have today is that you don't need to make $1 for a very, 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 very long time. Uber,
Yeah.
Amazon, Facebook, all these. Do you think, again, I also, like, I remember Foursquare's rocket ship ride. I remember when it just started to tail off.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was like by 2016 is when you'd really pivoted to basically being, I was listening to an old Kara Swisher interview with you from that era. Jeff had just taken over as CEO, and you pivoted to basically being an information and ads business as back end. Kara was asking, like, are you even really a consumer company anymore? And you're like, well, we still have 2 million people checking in and all this.
Yeah.
But do you ever think that, I mean, this product that you're talking about, the personalized map of the world, those of us who use Foursquare know that it kind of exists.
Yeah.
But do you ever wish that you'd continued with this consumer longer, and was that an option?
It wasn't really an option, right? There was a point, like you said, 2016, which is where Jeff took over as CEO. But really the moment is like in 2013. In 2013, this is before Instagram gets acquired. Instagram's getting big, it's threatening Facebook. Snapchat is starting to come out, right? And so Foursquare, which is about checking into places and that's how you share your status, is suddenly like definitely sharing the spotlight and losing momentum to like, well, why would you check in when you can just take a photo of where you are and get a bunch of likes for it? And it was, photo first. And then Snapchat came along and I think was, trying to be, Snap and Instagram with a narrative. But it turned into like, oh, camera first was the thing to do instead of being map first, which is what we are. And so around that time, we just stopped growing. Foursquare was growing, 1 million users a month, more than for the longest time, maybe more than that, right? That's a lot. I mean, we topped out at like 50, 60 million users. I mean, I don't know how many users are on the service, and that was still the days where you counted, user numbers as opposed to like MAUs.
Yeah.
Right. MAUs came a little bit later. But yeah, there was like, I think about this a lot, right? Because I'm working on some new stuff now. But I have this theory of the internet where Foursquare was like, we knew what we were building. Personalized map of the world. We're going to need an engine that like you keep your phone in your pocket. It knows where it is. It knows who's around you. You can start pushing notifications to people's phones. This is the dawn of contextual aware computing, of ambient computing. That is where the future is going, right? And I was like, I am building the company that is going to dominate that version of the future. And then what happened is it's like, no, we're not doing that. We want to endlessly scroll through our feeds. We want to do likes and comments. Influencers, creator economy, right? Like it's all about how many followers you have, how many likes you have, like, and spending time on the screen, scrolling through the glass. And that was just it's a different vision of the internet than what we had. And that is the vision of the internet that won. And so I was building.
For now.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that the arc of history points towards an internet that involves people interacting in person. Which is
as do I, yeah. And so I went through a period being like, man, I really fucked that up. Like that's the strategic blunder. Like I built for this and the world was going this way. Like now in 2024, like I'm skipping ahead here. Like I'm building another thing. I'm trying to start another company. Like I'm basically going back to 2013 and being like, okay, what were the things we said we're going to build? Yeah. Let's just build those things again. Right? Let's go back there. But because I think we're all kind of burnt out on scrolling and we're sick of the influencers and like the like counts are being phased out, right? Like that's happening. And so like, what is the next phase? Like everyone has an opinion on it. Whether you're like, oh, it was NFTs for a hot second, then Web3 for a hot second, then Metaverse for a hot second. Now it's AI for like a hot minute, probably longer. But I'm like, no, that little nugget of contextual stuff that got left back, like that's it. I think that's it. And so I want to go back and do that stuff. We're off topic, but where were we?
No, I mean, I want to be careful to make sure that we get to cover everything we're never going to cover everything we want to cover. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you are building now. And if we have time, we'll come back to some of my older questions. Tell us about what you're building now.
So my last gig at Foursquare was I ran this, the internal R&D group. It's called Foursquare Labs. And it was best job I ever had, right? Because like you have all the resources of the company and the job is just like make cool stuff with the tools and technology. And, we had made a bunch of stuff and, there's a lot of stuff that just never got launched. We built this thing called a MarsBot, but for AirPods, and it was like an AirPod city guide. We made it in 2019. I was going to go back and launch it at South by Southwest in 2020. Wrote a blog post about it, and then COVID happens, and it's like, well, we made this thing, and no one really used it. We never got a chance to launch it or really talk about it. And then, I ended up leaving the company. A lot of stuff got turned off. The labs team gets, pushed aside. And that stuff has been sitting there for a couple of years. And like of all the stuff I've ever worked on, like that was like one of my favorite projects.
Andrew Mason did something like this also, the founder of Groupon.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that was, yeah.
Andrew did a project called Detour, which was like walking tours, right? Where walking tours are like, okay, I've got 30 minutes and I want you to take me on a ride. So I'll put my headphones in and you tell me where to go. And what I'm trying to do is build almost like a walking assistant. Like there is no predetermined route, right? Like imagine a version of Siri that you don't have to summon. You don't rub the magic lamp to make Siri come out. Instead, Siri just kind of sits on your shoulder. And when you enter a room with people, it's like, well, these are the people here. When you walk by a place that's interesting, it's like, oh, you should go in there. When you enter a place that has your friends in it, it tells you who's there, right? When you're about to bump into someone, when there's something 100 yards ahead of you, like it's like Waze, but for walking. And so I'm trying to, like, this is not a new idea. Like we had kind of done this before and we had written about it and we had almost launched it. And in the same way that Foursquare was a sequel to Dodgeball, I'm trying to do a sequel to this MarsBot project, which we did.
This makes so much more sense to me than something that's, AR. I'm not a big believer in the glasses yet. I'm willing to be convinced otherwise, but having something that's audio, obviously we're already used to having these things in our
AirPods
ears.
are like poor man's augmented reality. Like everyone wants the glasses, but
or like augmented reality that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the glasses don't exist, right? Yeah. Like I've tried all of them, right? You get a little window, they're very heavy. Like Vision Pro is not meant for outside use. Do not walk around in public with that.
People do.
I know, it's weird, right? Yeah. And so like until that stuff exists, like what do? What's the lowest common denominator of a device that you can use? It's the AirPods, right? When we made the Marauders map, right? Like we made the Marauders map with Dodgeball on flip phones. everyone was talking about someday Palm Pilots. Do you know what Palm Pilots are?
Oh yeah.
Someday a Palm Pilot's going to have a network signal, and that's the app you build it for. Someday we'll have smartphones. People saw that stuff. And it was like, you build that when the smartphone exists. I'm like, well, I don't want to wait to build it. I want to make the Marauders map today with my shitty cell phone. And like, in the same way, I want to make my city guide that talks to you. I don't need the glasses. I'll just use the AirPods. The AirPods aren't crappy, but that's the lowest common denominator device to build for. And so that's the thing that we're trying to build now.
So what's your timeline? When do we get to try it?
I mean, for people that are building stuff in this room, like you probably know the hardest thing sometimes is just like talking aloud about the thing that you're doing. And so like I went on a podcast like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, basically just to like get it over with, right? I'm working on a thing. Yes, it's kind of in the space, kind of not. It's AirPods, it's this, it's called bbot. There's 50 people using it. So yeah, I said it, it's out, sweet. And now we're working with a couple other folks. It used to be an idea, now it's a project. It's eventually going to be a product, and then we'll turn it into a company. And we'll probably raise some money for it, but I'm kind of in that early stage. Yeah. So I'll send you a link. You can forward it around to people. Well, you can sign up to be a part of it, but like the test flight is like 50 people on it.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna just like a few brief questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Timing sounds good? Yes? Okay. All right. Biggest regret looking back, was there like a particular time when you feel like you really missed the mark, something that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I don't know if I can talk about it, right? I'll allude to it. Stepping out of the CEO role was like the biggest decision I made. And as an entrepreneur, it's a really, really hard, I just could not take it anymore. I did not like the job. I did not like what the job entailed. I wanted to go back to building products. I'm much better at building products than I am at dealing with like executive stuff, right? But that said, I'm very good at like leading a company and speaking to people and getting people hyped up and getting people to believe. And it's like, this is my vision. I know the vision's right. This is what we're doing. And so when you step out of that role, you concede that stuff. And Foursquare is in good hands and is doing great now. But like, there's things I wish we made. And like, could we have made that? I don't know, right? But there's other folks in that space that make stuff. There's I'm gonna get back and try to build stuff in that space. There's still millions of people that use Swarm, right? So that's just like it's a tough thing that I still think about.
Yeah.
So.
And any top advice that you'd give to people starting companies now, in terms of, I mean, anything, co-founders, fundraising, attitude, time management, any things that you think were special edges for you?
I get I appreciate the whole like -1 to 0 thing that's going on here. Like I didn't get that until you explained it, so thank you. But like that's a real thing, right? Like, hey, I'm like Johnny Founder that's built like 3 or 4 different things, including like a soccer team and a soccer startup. And it's still super hard to go from 0 to 1. It just doesn't happen. And you have to get up every day and be like, I guess I'm gonna make this thing like 2% better or 10% better. And it's a grind. And it's like really hard to keep the momentum going. Like even if you've done it a couple times, like I've done it a couple times, it's still really, really hard. And you just have to just push through that stuff and just make it a little better every day. The other thing is like, I'm a big believer in that, I think Reid Hoffman quote about the like, if you've waited too long, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've waited too long to launch it, right? Like I talk to founders all the time and they're like, I don't know if I want to show you my thing yet. It's not ready to go yet. It's like, do not make sexy, fancy, perfect screens. Like make something shitty, show it to people, get some feedback, show it again, get some feedback, show it again, get some feedback, and then make it look pretty. I mean, so it's otherwise you're just wasting your time on stuff you're going to deconstruct anyway. And so, I think when companies are like in stealth, unless you're doing something crazy, rocket ships, AI, blah, 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 like for consumer stuff, like the stuff I'm making, like just make it and give it to people and then learn from it. Like you got to do that.
We didn't talk at all about your soccer company. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Because this is completely different from the technology projects you've built, or does it have an aspect of technology I'm missing?
Well, I got two soccer things. Number one, there was like I got so burnt out by the Foursquare ride that like I got myself out of the CEO role. I went into the Foursquare Labs and built a bunch of stuff just to get back to building. And then like around the time that we were having our first kid, I went on paternity leave and I was like, let's build a soccer team. So I have a team. It's up in the Hudson Valley. It's called Kingston Stockade. And it's like a semi-pro soccer team. It's got like 1,000 fans, but it was totally analog. Like you're putting butts in seats. You're selling season tickets. You're selling sponsorships. You're making jerseys. You're having tryouts. It was like there's nothing to do with the internet. There's nothing to do with fundraising. No one's going to invest in this thing. It's just like make something for the community, right? Like I think I realized along the way, like everyone pegs me as like tech startup guy. And I mean, I guess that fits because I do tech startups, right? But like I really build software that brings people together. And it like maybe it doesn't have to be software, maybe it can be things, right? The soccer team is like, this is a thing that brings the town of Kingston together, during the season. And it was like a real epiphany to me. It's like, it's not just tech. It's not deep tech like the machine learning, Pilgrim, stop detection stuff we were doing. It's software that brings people together. It's community. It's like you're building tools that bring communities together. And like that was a real eye opener for me. And then I have this other company I work on called Street FC, which is like, taglines like, it'll be the biggest soccer club in the planet by making it super easy to play soccer in cities.